Preseason is 2 months out, and that sounds like a long time, but I promise you, time flies by. What will we be watching for when preseason kicks off? Let's talk about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, and I'm a Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are chatting a little bit about, some faraway stuff that's actually not as far as you might think. Obviously, preseason is going to be coming up here in, when you really think about it, just a few weeks, right? Obviously, 2 months does sound like a while, but let's be real, right? As soon as preseason rolls around, the vibes are in check. We're all ready for hockey to come back. And you know what? For once, I actually feel like I'm actually pretty anticipating, pretty anticipatory of this upcoming season. I don't know about you, but I think the time off has actually made me want to watch hockey again. And with the renewed focus on the kids, I guess I'm just kind of looking forward to it. It's been, it feels like it's been forever since we last watched the Jets. I know that they've had prospect camps and stuff, but there's just, it doesn't really quite scratch that itch, right? You're looking for real hockey, and like preseason's kind of like fake. I mean, let's be real, it doesn't count, but at that point, we're basically ready to gulp down just about any ounce of Jets hockey that we can realistically get our grubby little mitts on. And maybe this time, preseason's going to be illuminating for us, right? Because there's a real chance we're going to start to see how the Jets see this year's upcoming team. We have a lot of big questions around next season's squad, and I think preseason is going to be the first time that we really start to get some insight into how Arniel and the coaching staff are approaching this upcoming season. I want to talk about a couple of big questions I have and what I am personally watching out for preseason. But before we go too much further, just wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, like I said, preseason ways away, but I think for Jets fans, there's a couple of big questions. The biggest, I guess you could argue, is where are all the kids going to play, right? Are the Jets planning to feed them more into the bottom six? Are we planning to see them in the top six? How are the Jets going to balance the need to get them real, meaningful NHL time without throwing them to the Wolves immediately? What is going to be the comfortable level to give players like Lambert and Chibrikov and Heinola, the right deployments without forcing them into sink or swim situations. And I think, with Heinola, I'm not really too worried about that. But Lambert and Chibrikov, you do have a little bit more of the potential for some bust if things go south quickly. So you gotta treat them not necessarily with kid gloves, but be careful, right? The last thing you want to do is crater their confidence, especially Brad. Lambert's the kind of guy who really feeds off of that internal fire and that confident streak. So I think if there's anyone that I'm kind of wanting to ease into the NHL a little bit, it's probably him, just because he has like the highest potential for success, and also he is kind of a boomer bust prospect. But at this point, I think he's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is ready for the NHL at some level. I guess the biggest question is where? Because it kind of feeds into question number 2 about our second line center. Who the heck is playing in this role? You've heard me talk about Cole Perfetti. I've told you Brad Lambert, to me, just isn't ready for that. I think it's too aggressive. I think it's going to be too much. Now, I think they will try it in preseason. This is the time when you can sort of test Lambert's so-called readiness against players who might be fringe NHLers. Maybe they'll try him against some legitimate starters and see how that goes. I'll be honest, I think it's going to not go the best if you start playing against actual NHL competition. I think he still has some real growing to do, and the 2C role for the Jets, it's actually going to ask a lot of him. So preseason, I think they'll see what he's capable of, but like again, preseason is hard to necessarily rely on that as your number one indicator of how things are going because like I said, the standings don't count. It's a really prospect heavy and sometimes minor league heavy lineup for a lot of teams. And I just don't know that I want to read too much into it. But by the same token, if Lambert does really well and shows that he is perhaps ready for an elevated role, it does give you more flexibility. You could try him at 2C, maybe with Perfetti or something like that. There's just a lot of questions that I think the Jets are going to want to start to answer as they get into the preseason weeks and really heading up into the regular season. The Jets are trying to do a lot of things internally. I think there's a desire to try and address many of the Jets' weaknesses from within. And I don't mind that, but I also am very cognizant of the fact that it could backfire pretty spectacularly, especially for a team that is really trying to make the playoffs. So lots of trickiness with that. But again, you've heard me talk about it before. I'm not really opposed to it. So, aside from those two questions, I guess the last thing on my mind is how the Jets special teams are going to look. We've seen, Chenoweth, he's got a pretty good record when it comes to the defensive side of things. And obviously we want to see an adjusted power play. But, the strange thing for me, I've always wondered is why both the PK and the PP were so hard for this team to figure out when they used to be so good. Winnipeg special teams, several years ago, were generally much stronger. Now, I'm not going to say the PK was good because it's not, but at least at one point it was like league average. Under Arniel's first season, the PK was actually pretty decent. And then suddenly the second season, it was like a totally different experience. And to this day, I still don't know why there was such a drastic departure. But the power play really has the chance to become a really lethal weapon for Winnipeg. And I think Winnipeg really needs to focus on this area because if you're not scoring a lot at 5v5, your man advantage situation can be one of your biggest assets. And it used to be Winnipeg's trump card, right? You had an elite power play with Scheifele in the slot. You had Stastny in the bumper. And there was just so much skill and scoring potential at any time. And the fact that the Jets suddenly became this static, very stagnant, predictable power play unit was just really depressing. And I think this preseason is going to be a good window to see if they've really changed how they approach it. I want to see more overlaps. I want to see more aggression. I want to see more rotational flexibility and, stop deferring to Kyle Kahn for everything. Give yourself scoring options, create uncertainty in PK structures, and cause chaos. That is what the Jets have fed off before. It's what used to make them so dangerous. And, maybe if Laine somehow comes back, it would also give you a nice valve from KFC, because like KFC's one-timer is the one the Jets have deferred to, but it hasn't really been that great. So having a top-end shooter like Laine perhaps return would give you some pretty tremendous power play firepower, which, the Jets could use a little bit more of. I think everyone would love to have that Laine one-timer back in Winnipeg hands. But, of course, preseason, again, still some weeks away. And as we start getting into, the training camps and stuff, this is going to be an intriguing time for Winnipeg. There's a lot of potential for this team to really grow and be fun to watch, but I also suspect that there is, like I said, sort of like the Lambert thing, a lot of potential for boom and a lot of potential for some serious bust. And all I hope is that the Jets are patient throughout all of this. I think at the end of it, at the end of the season, we're really going to have seen some serious growth for this team. And that makes me excited in some ways, but also a little nervous if things start to go south, that the Jets get reactionary. I think that is the one thing they really have to avoid. But I'm sure things are going to be a little bit complicated. And one of the bigger factors that has kind of come up recently is, the thought of aging parts of this team's core, in particular, guys like Lowry, Scheifele, and Hellebuck. Muratatesh had a conversation in The Athletic a while back about aging curves with respect to these particular veterans. And they're not the only players that I think this applies to. Kyle Connor is going to at some point have the same thing. And it's why I've been a little hesitant on the whole, contract extension discussion. I want to talk about how likely it is to be a problem either this year or beyond, and when we can start to see some of the age-related declines really impact this particular group and how you can address it. But before we get into that part of the conversation, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Game Time. Game Time totally gets when you buy tickets, you often get hit with surprise fees, big charges, and sometimes when you're selecting seats on a map, you think you know where you're sitting, and you think you have a rough idea of what the view is like, but you get there and you find out, well, it's actually obstructed. Game Time gets it. They've been there before themselves, and that's why they want to help you get killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and they even offer you a lowest price guarantee and event cancellation protection. They are so confident and so happy with their service. In fact, they've become an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And best of all, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. For those of you who also enjoy trying to get maybe some location-specific deals or last-minute tickets, again, they offer plenty of last-minute savings. You can save up to 60% off buying, versus retail tickets for, sports, concerts, theater productions, anything you can imagine. They've got it for you. And again, they come backed with many of their great industry-leading guarantees. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are just, we're chatting about some fun stuff. Obviously, preseason is still a ways away, but we're still thinking about the future with this team and, how far or how close it is. And one thing that I think the Jets have sort of maybe thought about peripherally is, age-related declines for a couple of their top young players, or not young players, but some of their top core players, right? Scheifele, Lowry, Hellebuck. When are these guys going to really start to slow down? I think that is a bigger question. I think it's a concerning question when it comes to players like Scheifele and Connor in particular. These are two of your highest impact forwards, and it's why I've personally been a little bit hesitant to really want the Jets to re-sign Kyle Connor, especially when he's going to be asking probably in the neighbor of 10 to 11 million. I know you think that might sound crazy money, but I bet you his agent's thinking in that range when we're seeing some of the current contracts for guys like Travis Konechny and a few others. And with the cap going up, players are going to start asking for more money, and that's going to break some wage structures for a lot of teams. So age-related decline is one of those things where around, age 30, your body starts undergoing a number of changes. And for a lot of skaters, even the best ones, you do start to see players slow down. The recovery rates start to take a bit of an impact. Their body and biochemistry changes, they make them a little less mobile. Their ability to heal from injuries starts to be a little bit less effective. I mean, there's just a lot that happens when you hit that age. And, it sounds a little bit silly, but for, a lot of pro athletes, not just hockey, it is a really big turning point. Now, this doesn't always mean that you see drastic declines for some of the most elite players. Guys like Kopitar, I think, continue to prove that some folks are just built different or they adapt. Maybe a combination of both. Kopitar, I think, has done a really good job of maintaining his body and also adapting his game to his changing age. And look at how productive he's been over the last several years. He remains LA's best overall player. He is such a magnetic presence on the ice, still capable of scoring loads of points, still effective in driving play. And like the worst seasons of his recently have basically been, in terms of chance creation and shots against, basically break even, which you really can't hate. So I think that kind of stuff, could give you some confidence if you're hoping for the same thing for players like Scheifele. But I think with Mark and some of the other skaters, Lowry too, I do think that as you start getting to 31, 32, 33, you're going to see them start to slow down a bit. Scheifele's already kind of, in my mind, like a perfect 2C, but he's been Winnipeg's de facto 1C because we just don't have anyone else. And so I think for the upcoming year or two, before we start to see if we have a 1C in maybe somebody like Perfetti or Lambert, Scheifele is going to be able to do the job, and I think you can insulate him with the right skaters around him, whether it's Velarde or Ehlers or some other combination that we have yet to see. But I would expect that after the first couple of seasons of his new deal, you're going to start to see him maybe drop his scoring rates a bit. He's been a point per game for much of the last few years, but as that starts to change and his ability to keep up with the play starts to slow down, you might have to start thinking about reducing some of his ice time a bit and preparing for a future where he starts to look more like Wheeler. Now, he hasn't had like the same back issues or hernias or anything, so I think that's very positive. And I think Scheifele is still going to be productive for many, many years. I just don't think it's going to be, the sort of point per game stuff that we're used to. Lowry, I think, could have a much faster fall off. His style of hockey is really forceful and really physical. And for a lot of guys, that tends to mean that, in your early 30s, you do see a noticeable decline. And I just don't know if he's going to be able to resist that as much. He's put some serious miles on that body, and he's hit a lot of things, and the wear and tear at some point has to catch up. He's really not missed many games in his career. You think about a guy who's sort of been an every down kind of player, and Lowry is very much that mold. Now, maybe he's able to, deal with the conditioning and stuff and prepare himself for that eventual, downward slope. But I don't know how much his body physically can take before it starts to, break down a little bit, because he, again, plays such a punishing style. It's usually a style that does lead to a faster drop off, but Lowry is also kind of a physical freak, so maybe he doesn't have as much of an issue with it. Connor, I could see kind of going the Scheifele route, but I guess the thing with him is if his mobility changes, how is that going to impact his game, right? If his skating slows down, his skating is one of the biggest assets to him and how he creates his goal scoring. And any sort of change to that could be a really tough thing for him to adjust to. So I don't know how I feel about that so much. I think the one player that I'm actually less worried about with aging, though, is Hellebuyck, right? Goalies sometimes age out a little bit longer than, the skaters do. And Helly hasn't really shown signs of slowing down. He arguably posted his best ever season this past year. The playoffs perhaps weren't great, but the overall regular season was very much worthy of his second Vezina. And we just saw that Sergei Bobrovsky, who looked like he was down and out and like he would not really be able to turn his career around, basically had a Conn Smythe level performance, taking the Panthers all the way to the Stanley Cup. So goalies, there are some who definitely age out quickly, but you also see a lot of them who have late career resurgences. And Helly's just been a model of consistency to the point where I look at him as like the current Henrik Lundqvist. I think he is steady Eddie as they come. I think he's going to keep being very good for many years. And I think even with age-related decline, you're still going to see him somewhere in the Vezina conversation for like the next 3 to 4 years. After that, you might start to see him maybe take a bit of a turn in his performances. But even 36 and 37-year-old goalies have still put up some pretty monster results. So if there's one guy that I'm not really as worried about, it's Helly. Now, that doesn't mean that that's going to hold, and he could fall off very quickly if something happens, or he maybe has a very serious injury that tests his ability to recover. But again, based on what we've seen with a lot of other goalies and what we've seen with Helly in particular, I'm less worried about that. I just hope that at some point they maybe start to scale back his minutes a little bit. I think that could be a bit of a help in increasing the longevity of his career. And it's not like he has to play 40 games a season or something. Just give him a few extra nights off, and hopefully that not only helps him in the long term, but also helps him in the playoffs where he can be a little bit fresher. But the Jets are relatively well positioned to have some replacements start to fill in. The nice thing is that a lot of their prospects they currently have in the system are capable of starting to slide into these roles where you can maybe drop back a few deployments for guys like Scheifele and Connor if things start to get a little bit dicier for them. But, obviously longer term, I think the Jets are still looking for top-level prospects and young talents to add to this roster. It's why the McGroarty trade and whatever they do with Ehlers is very likely to impact a lot for this team, both in the present and the future. But at least for now, Winnipeg is probably not expecting to see declines hit that significantly until at least a few years down the road. So it is a tomorrow problem, but it's one that you still do have to think about. But at least in the immediate term, it shouldn't be as big of a problem. Now, speaking of the immediate term, earlier, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the start of Winnipeg's season, and I thought, after October, then you get into November and December, and I thought it would be fun to talk about Winnipeg's holiday schedule, because if you look at it, especially in December, it is going to be a great treat for Jets fans, with Winnipeg spending most of the month in their own territory, and we all love Winnipeg home games. Obviously, it's not like they're playing every single game at home, but they're playing a few extra at Canada Life Center versus a lot of teams that might be on the road. And then into January they have a huge extended homestand. We'll talk about what to expect from that part of the schedule in just a little bit. But before we go any further, for all of you Fox Sports or ESPN watchers, if you find yourselves having to turn down the volume because there's too much shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you daily to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's closing thoughts, as we're just chatting a little bit about Winnipeg's holiday schedule through November and December, which December especially is going to be a pretty home-heavy run of games. I think for a lot of us, we would certainly enjoy that. November is going to be a little bit more road warrior-y, I guess you could say. And then December, they come home for about 9 games. I personally love hearing Winnipeg's goal horn. I think it's a lot of fun. And honestly, the Jets in the past couple of seasons have had some really nice road splits. And the home splits have also been pretty, I would say, pleasant. Winnipeg at home used to be such a fortress. These days, they're comfortable winning away or on their own turf, but it's always nice when you can come home to some screaming Jets fans who are just happy to have the team hanging around. But November kind of starts off with an interesting run at home. You have one road game on like the first Friday of the month, and then you've got Tampa Bay, Utah, Colorado, and Dallas for a week of really intense home hockey. I think the back end of that week is going to be especially challenging, with Colorado and Dallas being pretty tough opponents, even though both teams have perhaps not had like crazy good off seasons. I'd expect them to still be pretty challenging. And then they have like an extra day off in between. And then the following week, starting the Tuesday, they're going to be on the road through the Eastern Conference, kicking off with the Rangers, then a tour through Florida. Florida's kind of fun because you're getting a reuniting with Paul Maurice again. Obviously, they just won a Stanley Cup, and he basically said he hopes the Jets win the next one, which was a sweet little nod. Obviously, for a lot of us, it's kind of like interesting to say that right in the middle of your Stanley Cup presentation on the ice. But hey, I think he does still hold a candle for the Jets. So, it was nice to hear that he still holds this team in high regard. We get to see a double dose of Paul Maurice because the following week, they're coming up to visit the Jets in Winnipeg. And it's funny, the Jets have actually won a lot of these games recently. So if Winnipeg can take both, that's nice to have defeated a former Cup winner here and a recent Cup champion twice in potentially like 4 or 5 days. Then you get a bit of a tough road stretch where Winnipeg is going to start in Pittsburgh, then head through Nashville, Minnesota, LA, and Vegas to end the month. That's a pretty tough run of games. There's a lot of tough Western opponents there. I'm hoping that the Jets' health holds out, because a couple of those opponents I expect to be some real bruisers. And of course, the resurgent and rebuilt, or I guess rebuilt Preds should be a very interesting watch. We haven't really, had a great chance to kind of sit down and process what that team is going to look like this upcoming season. But, all the big players like Shea and Stamkos that they signed should have a pretty tangible impact, at least in this upcoming season. They're going to be a lot more fun, a lot more dangerous, and they should make the Central even tougher, which it already was a really tough division. So great. We are just getting an even harder challenge to get to the top three. After that, December kicks off with a nice little road game against Dallas, then a home game against the Blues, and a couple of quick one-offs against Buffalo and Chicago before the Jets spend 4 straight games again back on home soil. They'll be facing off against the Jackets, Bruins, Knights, and Habs for the second week of December, which should be fun. I think you've got some real good chance to reward the home fans, give them something to cheer about and stuff. And then there's a couple of road games through the Pacific Division. You've got San Jose and Anaheim, sandwiched between a couple of sort of empty blocks. And then the Jets take on Minnesota at home, followed by one away game against Toronto right before the Christmas break. And then you've got a few days off. Obviously, the holidays should be a nice time for folks to reconnect with their family and relax and stuff before the Jets have a couple of quick home games against the Sens and Preds, and then finally one away game against Colorado to end the 2024 year. So this should be a pretty good stretch. I'm hoping that the first couple of months for Winnipeg are not too bad. If the Jets hover around 500 or above, I think that's a pretty good run. I think they'll be much better than 500. I'm expecting the Jets to be probably pacing similarly to what they had this past season. But again, with all the changes to the roster and the changes from veterancy to a younger roster, a more youthful team, I could see that leading to some perhaps early standing slippage, but not going to worry about it too much. I think Winnipeg throughout the entire season is going to be at the very least in the mix for a playoff spot, even if things have a few turbulent moments. But I think at the end of the day, the Jets will still probably make it. I think on the future episode, probably later this week, we'll chat about their January and February. The start of 2025 is going to be really fun for the Jets. They have like a huge slate, about 8 straight games at home, which is awesome. I love Jets home hockey. It's my favorite. I was even thinking at some point maybe flying up to Winnipeg. I'd love to catch another home game. It's been several years since my last one, and I'm hoping that the vibes are going to be good with this team. Arniel kind of comes from the same school of Bones vibiness, and that should be a positive experience for Winnipeg fans. So, February is going to be a little bit quieter, but as the Jets kind of roll into their second half of the season, following the 2024 calendar close, should be a good run to the playoffs. So let's hope for some fun Jets hockey. I'm excited for the season. Curious to know your thoughts. Are you looking forward to it? Drop your thoughts and predictions for the upcoming season in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for more Jets off-season coverage, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.